A bankrupt man has no business holding a card this powerful anymore, my son said, as he took my black American Express from my wallet. Then he snapped it in half right there in the middle of the restaurant. My daughter-in-law didn't stop him. She just watched. Every conversation around us faded into silence. I looked at the broken card for a long second, lifted my glass of water, and calmly said, "You're right. Keep it." What none of them knew was that the man watching from the corner had just fallen into the trap I'd spent 18 months building. Before we begin, I'm genuinely grateful you're here. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, city, state, country. I read every single one. A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson it carries is very real. There's a specific kind of Monday morning I keep coming back to, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was the last ordinary one I ever had. October 2019. The alarm went off at 5:45, same as it had for 40 years. I dressed in the dark, the way Margaret hated. She always said I'd put on mismatched socks one day and walk into a meeting looking like a circus clown. I never did. But I stopped arguing the point sometime around our 20th anniversary. The kitchen smelled like coffee and butter when I came downstairs. Margaret stood at the stove in her blue robe, pushing scrambled eggs around a pan with the kind of focused attention most people reserve for surgery. "Henderson meeting at 9, she said, without turning around. "I know. You forgot last time. I was 20 minutes late. That's not forgetting, that's traffic." She turned around, then spatula in hand, one eyebrow raised in that particular way that had ended more arguments than I could count. "Walter James Greer, you were sitting in the driveway listening to the end of a baseball game." My chest shook with a laugh I tried to swallow. It was the 7th inning. It was a Tuesday morning. But the corner of her mouth pulled up, and that was enough. That was always enough. I poured my coffee, real coffee, the kind that cost more per pound than my first pair of work boots, and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the front yard. The roses Margaret had planted along the fence were holding their last color before the cold took them. Deep red, almost burgundy in the early light. "The roses look good this year," I said. "I fertilized them last week." She slid the eggs onto a plate and set it in front of my usual chair. "You didn't notice." I noticed. No, you did not. I noticed this morning. She sat down across from me with her own coffee, both hands wrapped around the mug the way she did when the weather turned. 36 years in this house," she said, "and you still can't tell a Mr. Lincoln from a Chicago piece. One's red, one's pink, one's burgundy, one's coral." She shook her head, but her eyes were warm. Hopeless. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. She didn't pull away. She never pulled away. The drive to West Monroe took 22 minutes that morning, light traffic for a Monday. I parked the Denali in the garage beneath the building and rode the elevator to the 14th floor, where the brass nameplate beside the door read, "Greer and Sons Construction. Walter J. Greer, founder and CEO. 40 years, 7 active projects. 40 employees who showed up every morning because this company showed up for them first." I stood in front of that nameplate for a moment longer than usual. Not out of pride exactly. Something closer to gratitude. Derek was already in the conference room when I walked in, his suit jacket thrown over the back of a chair, blueprints spread across the full length of the table. He had his mother's focus when he worked, that same locked-in expression that blocked out everything that wasn't directly in front of him. "Morning," I said. "Morning." He didn't look up. "Riverside expansion. If we add 12 crew members to the second phase, we finish 3 weeks ahead of the county deadline. I pulled out a chair and sat down, studying the drawings. The lines were clean. The load calculations were precise. Whoever had taught him to read a blueprint had done it properly. "Your mother taught you this," I said. Derek looked up, then genuinely confused. "What?" "The blueprints. She taught you how to read them." I tapped the paper. "You were 12. She sat with you every night for 3 months." He stared at me. "Dad, I thought you taught me that. I was never home before 9 back then." I looked at the drawings again, at the careful notations in the margins that reminded me even now of her handwriting. "She taught herself first. Said if I was building something for you, the least she could do was learn to read it." Derek's expression shifted, something moving through it that he didn't quite have words for. He looked back down at the blueprints. "Expand the crew," I said. "But I want weekly progress reports. Every Friday. I know Dad. And Derek." I waited until he looked at me. "Good work." He held my gaze for a moment, surprised in the way he always was when I said it, because I didn't say it often enough, and we both knew it. Then he nodded and went back to the drawings. I stood at the window on the ride back down that evening, watching Chicago go gold in the late afternoon light, 40 stories of glass and steel throwing the sun back at itself. Everything was exactly where I had put it. The company, the house, the life Margaret and I had built from nothing but 2 folding chairs, and a belief that hard work was its own kind of promise. When I got home, Margaret was standing at the kitchen window, both hands flat on the counter, staring at something in the backyard. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "Nothing." She turned and smiled, quick, easy, the smile she used when she didn't want me to ask again. "Just thinking." But Margaret never just thought. She always thought about something specific. I didn't ask again. I should have. 3 weeks after that Monday morning, everything changed. Not with a phone call, not with a meeting, with a spreadsheet. It was a Tuesday evening in November, and I was alone in the office when Richard Kowalski called. Richard had been my head accountant for 19 years. In 19 years, the man had never once called me after 6 p.m. When his name lit up my phone at 8:43, my stomach dropped before I even answered. "Walter." His voice was stripped of its usual steadiness, flat, careful, the way a man sounds when he's rehearsed what he has to say and still isn't sure he can say it. "I've been through the numbers 4 times. Tell me." "The Cook County project." A pause. "Final settlement? We're looking at a loss of $3,247,000. The number landed in my chest, like a dropped beam. I set my pen down on the desk, very slowly, the way you move when you're afraid any sudden action might make something real that you're still hoping isn't. "That's not a market loss," I said. "No." Richard's breath came out uneven. "The subcontractor invoices someone rerouted the payments. Internal authorization codes were used, but Walter I cross-referenced the timestamps. Those authorizations were entered on days when nobody with that clearance level was logged into the system. Someone did this deliberately. I can't prove it yet, but the pattern..." He stopped. "Yes, I believe so." "Go home, Richard. I'll call you in the morning." I sat in the empty office for a long time after that. The city spread out below the windows, 10,000 lit squares of other people's ordinary evenings, none of them knowing that 40 stories up a man was staring at a number that had just taken 40 years of work and turned it into a question mark. I called home at 9:15. Margaret picked up on the second ring. "You're late," she said. "Dinner's cold." Maggie. Just her name. Just the one word. She went quiet. 3 seconds, maybe 4, long enough to hear everything I hadn't said. How bad? She asked, her voice dropping into that particular register she kept for the moments that mattered. Bad. Come home, Walter. I need to. Walter James Greer. Her voice was steady and clear and left absolutely no room for argument. Come. Home. Right now. She was waiting at the kitchen door when I pulled into the driveway. No coat, just her blue robe, arms crossed against the November cold, watching my headlights sweep across the garage. I walked inside and sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd balanced checkbooks in 1984, with more month than money, where Derek had done his algebra homework, where we'd planned every vacation we'd ever taken, and I told her the number. Margaret put the kettle on. She didn't speak until the tea was made, and 2 mugs were on the table, and she was sitting across from me with both hands wrapped around hers. 1995, she said. I looked up. You don't remember. It wasn't a question. November 1995, that bad contract in Cicero. We lost $380,000. She watched me over the rim of her mug. You sat in the parking lot of the office for 2 hours. I had to come find you. I remember sitting in the parking lot. You don't remember what happened after. Her eyes held mine. I called 12 clients the next morning, before you were even awake, asked every one of them for a 60-day extension on outstanding invoices. My hands tightened around my mug. You never told me that. You didn't need to know. Her chin lifted slightly, that particular Margaret expression that mixed stubbornness with love in proportions I had never fully figured out. You needed to fix it, so I handled the part you couldn't see, and you handled the part you could, and we came out the other side. Same as always. Maggie, this isn't Cicero. This is $3.2 million. This isn't a bad contract. Someone did this on purpose. She set her mug down. The small sound of ceramic on wood was the only sound in the kitchen for a moment. Then we find out who, she said. Just like that. No tremor in her voice, no wide eyes, no wringing of hands. Just 4 words, flat and certain, like she was reading something off a list. It's not that simple. It never is. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and I felt her warmth all the way up my arm. But you built this company out of nothing, Walter. A used pickup truck and a handshake. You didn't do that by walking away from hard things. My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected. I turned my hand over and held hers properly, the way I had on our first date, nervous and deliberate, in a diner on North Clark Street, 41 years ago. I don't know where to start, I admitted. The words cost me something. I didn't say things like that easily. Yes, you do. Margaret squeezed my hand once, firm and sure. You start with the name. Find the name Walter. Everything else follows from that. We sat there at the kitchen table until after midnight, the tea gone cold between us, talking through every contract, every vendor, every subcontractor who had touched the Cook County project. Margaret had a mind for numbers that put most accountants I'd hired to shame, and she asked questions that cut straight to the bone. By the time I finally went to bed, I didn't have an answer, but I had a direction. It took me 6 months to find the name, and when I did, I wished I hadn't, because it wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had sat at my dinner table, shaken my hand at my wife's birthday party, and smiled at us both like he meant it. By May 2020, I had a name. 6 months of pulling threads, vendor records, payment authorizations, subcontractor licensing filings, and every single one of them led back to the same place. Marcus Doyle. Former city contracts administrator turned private infrastructure consultant operating out of a glass office on Michigan Avenue with a firm handshake and a reputation for knowing the right people at the right time. I had known Marcus Doyle for 11 years. We had shaken hands at industry dinners. He had attended Margaret's 55th birthday party and brought a bottle of wine that cost more than our first month's rent. I had never once looked at him the way I was looking at his name now, written in my own handwriting, circled 3 times in red ink at the center of a web that had cost me everything. I told Margaret on a Sunday evening in May. We were sitting on the back porch, the kind of warm spring night that makes Chicago feel like it's apologizing for winter. I set the folder on the table between us and watched her face as she read. She didn't rush. Margaret never rushed anything she wanted to understand properly. She turned each page slowly, and I watched her jaw set tighter with every one that particular expression she got when something made her furious, but she was choosing to think before she spoke. "Marcus Doyle," she said finally, setting the last page down. "Yes." He sat at this table. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were burning. "He ate my pot roast." "I know. He told me the roses were beautiful." She looked at me directly. "He stood in our front yard and complimented my roses, Walter." "Maggie, I want to look him in the eye." She closed the folder with a sharp, clean motion. "Invite him to dinner." I stared at her. "That's not a good idea." "It's an excellent idea." She stood up and picked up her wine glass. "You need to know how he behaves when he thinks he's already won. You can't learn that from a folder." She was right. She was almost always right, which was occasionally inconvenient. Marcus Doyle arrived at our door 3 weeks later at 7 o'clock, exactly a bottle of Napa Cabernet in one hand and a smile that belonged on a campaign poster. He was 61, silver-haired, the kind of man who wore confidence the way other men wore cologne. You noticed it before. You noticed anything else. "Walter." He gripped my hand. "It's been too long." "Come in, Marcus. Margaret's in the kitchen." Dinner moved the way these things do when nobody is saying what they actually mean, smooth on the surface, pulling hard underneath. Doyle complimented the food. I asked about his current projects. He answered in the careful general way of a man who had learned to say a great deal without saying anything at all. Then my phone rang. A client I couldn't ignore. I excused myself and stepped into the hallway. I was gone 4 minutes. When I came back, Doyle was sitting very still, both hands flat on the table, and Margaret was standing at the counter with her back to him, refilling the water pitcher with the calm, deliberate movements of a woman who had just said something she meant entirely. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Perfect," Doyle said. His smile hadn't moved, but something behind his eyes had shifted, tightened, recalculated. "Margaret was just telling me about the roses." Margaret turned around and set the pitcher on the table. She looked at Doyle with an expression I had seen exactly twice in 36 years of marriage, once when a contractor tried to cheat us out of $60,000 in 1998, and once when Derek came home at 17 with someone else's car. "Sit down, Walter," she said. "I'll get dessert." Doyle left at 9:30 with the same handshake and the same smile. I walked him to the door and watched his car pull away from the curb, and then I went back inside and found Margaret at the kitchen sink washing the dessert plates with more force than they required. "What did you say to him?" I asked. She kept her eyes on the plates. "I told him the Cook County numbers didn't add up." My heart stopped for a full beat. "Margaret, okay, I didn't mention you." She turned off the faucet and dried her hands. "I told him I'd been reviewing some old project files and noticed some irregularities in the subcontractor payment records. I said I was probably imagining things." "And what did he say?" He said I probably was. She hung up the dish towel, turned around, and looked at me with those steady brown eyes that had seen through every piece of nonsense I had ever tried to get past her. He said it very smoothly, very kindly. Her chin lifted. And then he changed the subject in exactly the way a guilty man changes a subject. She walked past me toward the hallway, then stopped. Walter. She didn't turn around. That man is going to come after you again if you let him. Whatever you're planning, don't wait too long. That night, after Margaret was asleep, I sat in the study and watched the cursor blink on my screen. Then I opened a new folder. Named it Rainy Day. Margaret got sick in September 2020. It started the way these things always start, a cough that didn't leave a tiredness she brushed off as the season changing a doctor's appointment. She rescheduled twice before I finally drove her there myself and sat in the waiting room reading a 6-month-old Sports Illustrated without absorbing a single word. Stage 3. That was the phrase the oncologist used, and I remember thinking with the strange clarity that comes with shock that it was an odd way to describe something that felt like the end of a story rather than a point along one. Margaret took the news the way she took every hard thing, straight on, without flinching, asking questions, while I was still trying to find the floor beneath my feet. "What's the treatment timeline?" she asked the doctor. "We'll start chemotherapy within the next 2 weeks. Side effects I need to plan around." "Margaret." My voice came out rougher than I intended, cracked somewhere in the middle of her name. She reached over and put her hand on my knee. Firm. Grounding. The way you hold on to something you're not planning to let go of. "I need the information, Walter," she said quietly. "That's how I handle things. You know that. I knew that. I had known that for 36 years. It didn't make it easier to sit there and watch her take notes. She fought for 5 months. That's the word people use, fought, and I used to find it hollow, a word that made illness sound like something you could strategy your way out of. But watching Margaret through those 5 months, I understood it differently. Fighting wasn't about winning. It was about choosing every single day to remain fully yourself in the face of something that wanted to reduce you to a diagnosis. She cooked dinner when she could stand. She called Derek every Sunday. She tended the roses in October until the cold made it impossible. And then she stood at the kitchen window and watched them from inside with an expression I didn't have a word for. In January, when the treatment stopped working, she asked me to bring her laptop to the hospital. "I have some files I need to organize," she said. "Maggie, you don't need to." "Walter." She looked at me over the reading glasses she'd started wearing 2 years ago and never quite gotten used to. "Please." I brought the laptop. I didn't ask what she was organizing. I sat in the chair beside her bed and read the newspaper while she typed, and the only sound in the room was the soft click of keys and the hum of the hospital equipment, and outside the window the particular silence of a Chicago February. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, she squeezed my hand and asked everyone else to step out of the room. "The study," she said. Her voice was thin, but her grip was steady. "The computer. There's a folder. Maggie, don't, rainy day." Her eyes found mine and held them with everything she still had. "Promise me you'll look." My throat closed completely. I couldn't speak for a moment, couldn't do anything except hold her hand and try to memorize the exact weight of it. "I promise," I said. She passed 2 days later on a Thursday just before dawn. I was holding her hand. The funeral was on a Saturday. 214 people came, contractors, clients, neighbors, the woman from the flower shop on Green Bay Road who had been selling Margaret roses for 20 years. Derek stood beside me at the door, and shook every hand with red eyes and a jaw set tight enough to crack. Halfway through the reception, I looked across the yard and saw a man I didn't recognize standing near the back fence, separate from every group, a glass of water in his hand. Dark suit, silver hair, Marcus Doyle. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was watching the way a man watches something he has calculated rather than something he feels. And when our eyes met across that yard full of people who had loved my wife, he raised his glass slightly, a small composed gesture, and then looked away. My hands went cold. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Derek had finally let Carol pull him toward the door, I sat alone in the study. I opened the laptop, found the folder Margaret had named, and I had named after her the same word on the same night without knowing the other had done it. Rainy day, 47 documents, 8 months of work. Subcontractor records, payment, routing tables, shell company registration filings, everything I had been building, she had been building alongside me in the hours I thought she was sleeping. At the bottom of the last page in her handwriting, a single line. Be careful of the man who smiles at funerals. I finally understood what she had been staring at through the kitchen window all those months ago. She had seen him coming long before I did. 3 months after Margaret's funeral, I was sitting in an office that used to have 40 people in it. Greer and Sons was still technically open. 3 small projects running on skeleton crew enough to keep the lights on, and the insurance paid not enough to pretend things were what they used to be. The big conference table where Derek had spread his Riverside blueprints was covered in stacked files I hadn't touched in weeks. The brass nameplate was still on the door. Some mornings I thought about taking it down. Most mornings I didn't have the energy. I had Margaret's folder open in front of me, the 47 documents I had memorized, and still kept reading, as if one more pass might produce something I had missed. Outside the windows, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in May, throwing sunlight around like it meant it, temperature climbing towards 70, the kind of afternoon that made you feel guilty for sitting inside. My phone rang at 2:14. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Walter Greer. The voice was graveled and unhurried, the voice of a man who had spent decades outdoors and wasn't embarrassed about it. Speaking. Earl Dixon. I worked your Riverside crew from 98 to 2011. Foreman on the Kedzie Avenue Bridge Project 04 and 05. I sat up straighter. Earl Dixon. 68 years old, built like a man who had poured concrete for a living, because he had poured concrete for a living. One of the best foremen I had ever put on a job site, and one of the few men I had known in this business whose word was worth exactly what he said it was. Earl. I felt something shift in my chest, not quite warmth, but close to it. It's been a long time. I heard what happened, he said. The company, Margaret. A pause. Wanted to call sooner. Took me a while to figure out what to say. You don't have to say anything. I know I don't. His voice stayed level, unhurried. But I'm going to anyway, so bear with me. He cleared his throat. I went broke in 1987. Lost everything: tools, truck, the house my father left me. My wife took the kids to her mother's place in Rockford and told me she'd be back when I figured out who I was without the money. Earl, let me finish. Not unkind, just firm. I built half of Chicago with these hands. Not half a good quarter maybe, but you take my meaning. The point is, someone can take your money, Walter. They can take your truck and your tools and your house. What they cannot take, his voice dropped slightly, deliberate, is the 40 years of knowing how to build something out of nothing. That doesn't live in your bank account. It lives in here. A pause. You follow me? My throat tightened in a way I hadn't expected from a phone call. I follow you. Good. The word landed clean and flat. Because there's something else. Something I've been sitting on for 2 months trying to decide whether to say. Another pause, shorter this time. I know a woman at the FBI Chicago field office. We go back 15 years. Her husband worked my crew on the O'Hare expansion. Good man. She reached out to me last month, asked if I still had any contact with you. Every nerve in my body went still. Why? Oh, because they've been building a case against Marcus Doyle for 3 years, Earl said. Bid rigging, Sherman Antitrust Act violations. That's the federal law against contractors colluding to fix bids on public projects, rigging who wins and who loses on city contracts. They've got the financial pattern. They've got the shell companies. What they don't have is someone who worked close enough to Doyle to testify from the inside. He stopped. They think that person is you. The folder was open in front of me. 47 documents. Margaret's handwriting on the last page. Be careful of the man who smiles at funerals. Walter, Earl said. You still there? I'm here. My voice came out steadier than I felt. What exactly are they asking? To meet. That's all for now. No commitments, no signatures. Just a conversation with the agent running the case. He exhaled. I told her I'd ask. I'm asking. I looked out the window at the Chicago afternoon, the sun hitting the glass of the building across the street, turning it briefly gold. What's her name? I asked. Mills. Agent Karen Mills. I closed the folder. Margaret's folder. The one she had built in secret, page by page, in the hours I thought she was resting. Set it up, I said. Earl Dixon died 14 months later, in July 2022. A heart attack at his workbench on a Saturday morning. He never saw what came next. At his graveside on a gray afternoon with the kind of Chicago wind that cuts straight through whatever you're wearing, I made him a quiet promise. I intended to keep it. I had never walked into a federal building as anything other than a contractor submitting a bid. The Dirksen Federal Building on South Dearborn sits 47 stories above the Loop, all dark glass and bureaucratic weight. The kind of architecture that reminds you the government has been here longer than you have, and plans to stay. I went through security on a Thursday morning in August, signed in at the front desk, and rode the elevator to the 14th floor with a man in a postal service uniform who hummed something I didn't recognize, and got off at the 11th. Agent Karen Mills was waiting in a conference room at the end of a corridor that smelled like recycled air and old coffee. She was younger than I expected, mid-40s, dark blazer brown hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had better things to think about than her hair. She stood when I came in and shook my hand the way people do when they're used to making assessments quickly. Mr. Greer, thank you for coming. Earl Dixon said you were worth meeting. I pulled out the chair across from her. He had good judgment. Something moved briefly across her face, respect maybe for the name. He did. She sat down. I was sorry to hear he passed. She opened a folder on the table between us, thick-tabbed, the kind of organized that meant someone had been working on it for a long time. She turned it so I could see the first page. Marcus Doyle's name was at the top, followed by a chart that connected 11 city infrastructure contracts across 4 years, each one routed through a different set of subcontractors. Each subcontractor traceable if you looked hard enough, the way Mills clearly had, back to the same cluster of shell companies registered in Delaware. Hi, I'm Biko. We've been building this for 3 years, she said. Bid rigging under the Sherman Antitrust Act. That means Doyle and his associates were coordinating in secret to predetermine who would win public contracts, eliminating real competition and overcharging the city of Chicago by an estimated $47 million across those 11 projects. I know what bid rigging is, I said. I know you do. I'm telling you the scale. She turned another page. We have the financial pattern. We have the shell company structures Delaware LLCs use to obscure ownership and move money without triggering standard reporting thresholds. What we don't have is a cooperative witness who can place Doyle inside the decision-making process. She looked at me directly. Someone Doyle trusts. Someone whose credibility is unimpeachable. A beat. Someone he believes has nothing left to lose. The last sentence sat in the room for a moment. You want me to pretend I've lost everything, I said. We want Doyle to believe it. She held my gaze. There is a difference, Mr. Greer, and that difference is the only thing that keeps this entirely within the law. Walk me through it. She leaned forward. You make the bankruptcy visible. Sell the house, the car, reduce your visible lifestyle to something that matches a man who's financially finished. We work with the U.S. District Court to temporarily seal your financial records under Section 1956 of the Federal Money Laundering Statutes that allows us to shield your actual asset structure from public access during an active federal investigation, so Doyle can't pull your real numbers through standard channels. She turned another page. Meanwhile, any assets you want to protect move into a properly structured LLC before the visible changes begin. Clean, documented, entirely legal. You're not defrauding anyone. You're creating a performance, and the court is aware of every step. I thought about the house on Wilmette, Margaret's roses along the front fence. My son, I said. Derek. Mills met my eyes without flinching. He can't know. He'll think I've lost everything. Yes. For how long? However long the operation takes. She didn't soften it. I respected that. If Derek's behavior changes, if he starts acting like a man who knows something, Doyle will notice within days. Doyle is careful, Mr. Greer. He didn't run this operation for 6 years by missing things. I looked down at the folder, at the 11 contracts, at the $47 million in public money that had disappeared into shell companies registered in Delaware, while real contractors who played by the rules lost bids they should have won. My hands were flat on the table, steady. Margaret would have noticed that. There's one more thing, Mills said. She pulled a single page from the back of the folder and slid it across. 3 weeks ago, one of Doyle's associates approached a city planning official we've had under observation. The conversation included a reference to you specifically, to the possibility that your financial situation made you, quote, no longer a concern. I read the transcript. Twice. He thinks I'm finished, I said. Which means, Mills said carefully, that right now, before he gets cautious again, is the best window we'll have. She folded her hands on the table. I can't make this decision for you. I can tell you that what Doyle did to your Cook County project was deliberate, documented, and part of a pattern that goes back to 2017. I can tell you that without a cooperative witness, our case has significant gaps. And I can tell you, she paused, something shifting in her voice, that your wife's folder was some of the cleanest preliminary documentation I have ever received from a civilian. My chest pulled tight enough that I had to breathe through it carefully. She would have liked hearing that, I said. I imagine she would have. Mills waited. I picked up the pen she had set beside the cooperation agreement. Tell me where to sign, I said. Mills gave me a list. It was a single typed page, clean margins, no header, the kind of document that didn't officially exist. 7 items. I read it twice in the parking garage beneath the Dirksen building, then folded it into my jacket pocket and drove home to Wilmette. I looked at that list for 3 days before I could start. The first item was the house. I called Derek on a Tuesday morning in January. Told him I was listing the Wilmette property. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough for me to count to 5. Dad. His voice came out thin, careful, like a man stepping onto ice he wasn't sure would hold. This house is where I grew up. I know what it is, Derek. Mom's roses are in the front yard. My chest pulled tight, but I kept my voice level. I can't carry a $1,400 mortgage on what I have left. The math doesn't work. Then let me help. Carol and I can. No. The word came out harder than I intended. I softened it slightly. This is mine to handle. Dad, you're being stubborn. I'm being practical. I looked out the kitchen window at the roses, deep red dormant now in January, the canes cut back the way Margaret had shown me years ago. I'll be fine, Derek. I need you to trust me on this. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had shifted into something quieter and more careful, the voice of a son who was starting to believe something he didn't want to believe. Okay, he said. Okay, Dad. After we hung up, I put on my coat and went outside. Stood in front of those rose beds for 10 minutes in the January cold, hands in my pockets, looking at what Margaret had planted and tended and loved for 31 years. The canes were bare and gray against the frost-hard ground. In April, they would bloom again, the same deep burgundy, the same coral, whether I was here to see them or not. I went back inside and started packing. The car was next. I drove the Denali to a dealership on West Irving Park Road on a Thursday morning, traded it for a 2009 Honda Civic with 112,000 miles on it, and a rear bumper held on by optimism. The salesman, 20-something earnest, clearly uncomfortable, tried 3 times to talk me into something newer. Sir, for the trade-in value on this Denali, you could get into a 2019 F-150. I'll take the Civic. The difference in cash would be, I know what the difference is. I kept my voice patient. I'll take the Civic and the cash. He processed the paperwork with the careful neutrality of a man who had decided not to ask questions. I drove the Civic out of the lot, cloth seats, a heater that took 4 minutes to warm up a radio that picked up AM better than FM. I went directly to the branch of First Midwest Bank, where my LLC account was held, and deposited $37,000 in cash, which brought the protected total to just under $8 million. Clean. Documented. Exactly as Mills had outlined. I drove the Civic to the address on North Kedzie and parked in front of a narrow 2-story house with aluminum siding and a front porch that needed repainting. I had bought this house in 2015 when the previous owners put it up for sale. I had never told anyone why. Margaret and I had rented it in 1983 for $340 a month. We had moved in with a mattress, a card table, and 2 folding chairs, and Margaret had stood in the empty kitchen and said, "It's perfect." I had looked at the cracked linoleum and the window that didn't quite close and thought she was being generous. Now I understood she had been right. I carried my boxes inside, set them down in the kitchen, stood at the window and looked out at the narrow backyard, a square of winter-dead grass, a rusted fence, nothing like Wilmette. "It's still perfect, Maggie," I said to the empty room. The room didn't answer, but saying it out loud helped more than I expected. My neighbor introduced herself the following Saturday. Eleanor Marsh, 72, retired schoolteacher, silver hair, cut short, the kind of woman who brought over a casserole and expected nothing in return except a decent conversation. She knocked at 10 in the morning with a dish covered in foil and looked at me with the direct, assessing gaze of someone who had spent 30 years managing other people's children. "You're new," she said. "Walter Greer." I held the door open. "Come in." She sat at my kitchen table and watched me put the casserole in the refrigerator and pour 2 cups of coffee, and she said, "I heard you had a difficult year." "I've had better. My husband lost his business in 1992, she said. Hardware store, 23 years. The bank took it on a Wednesday, and he cried in the driveway until I made him come inside. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. He used to say the hardest part wasn't losing the money. It was pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Something in my chest shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. Because Eleanor Marsh, who knew nothing about FBI operations or shell companies, or Marcus Doyle, had just described exactly and precisely what I was doing. "That is hard," I said. The first completely honest sentence I had spoken to anyone outside of Mills in months. She studied me for a moment with those teacher's eyes. "You have that look, though." "What look?" The look of a man who isn't actually finished." She stood, picked up her coffee cup, and nodded toward the front of the house. "Your porch railing needs repainting, by the way." I looked down at my own coffee. For the first time since I had moved into this house, I smiled. In a city the size of Chicago, you would think a man could disappear quietly. He can't. Not if he spent 40 years building things people can see: bridges, overpasses, the retaining wall along the north branch of the Chicago River that most people drive past every day without knowing his name is in the foundation records. Not if his company's name appeared in the Tribune's business section 11 times in the last decade. Not if he attended the same industry dinners, the same church, the same hardware store on Northwestern Avenue for 30 years running. Bad news. In a small professional world, travels faster than any news I have ever seen. By the second Sunday in April, I was sitting in my usual pew at St. Benedict's third row from the left, same spot Margaret and I had occupied since 1991, wearing a suit that was 2 seasons old and shoes I had not had resoled. I had made both of those choices deliberately, the way you make every choice when you are performing a role that has to be believable to people who have known you for decades. Jim Patterson found me in the parking lot after the service. Jim was 64, salt and pepper hair, the kind of man who wore his prosperity comfortably, good coat, good watch, the easy posture of someone who had not worried about money in a long time. We had known each other since 1994. He had referred 3 clients to me over the years. I had referred 2 back. He looked at my shoes first. Then my watch, the Timex I had bought at a Walgreens on Milwaukee Avenue for $22. Then back up at my face with the careful, pained expression of a man trying to be kind and finding it harder than he expected. "Walter." He gripped my hand. "How are you holding up?" "Getting there, Jim. I heard things got—" He stopped, started again. "I heard the company's been going through some changes." "It has. If there's anything I can—" "I'm fine." I kept my voice easy, unhurried. "But thank you." He nodded, squeezed my hand once more, and walked to his car. I watched him pull out of the lot, and knew with the certainty of someone who had spent 40 years in a city where reputation moved like water that he would make at least 2 phone calls before he got home. I was right. By Wednesday, I could feel it, the slight shift in how people looked at me when I walked into a room, the half-second pause before a greeting, the over-careful cheerfulness of men who had decided I needed handling gently. The Walmart on North Cicero Avenue was not a store I had ever shopped in during my Wilmette years. I went there now twice a week, deliberately at times, when I was likely to run into someone I knew. On a Thursday afternoon in late April, I was standing in the checkout line with a basket that held instant oatmeal, 2 cans of soup, a package of pasta, and a bag of ground coffee, the store brand $4.62, when I heard my name. Jim Patterson was 2 people behind me. He was holding a bottle of Opus 1 Napa Cabernet that cost more than my grocery bill. He looked at my basket, then at me, then back at the basket with an expression he tried to rearrange too slowly. "Walter, I didn't know you shopped here." "Good prices," I said. "Right." He nodded. The bottle of wine shifted in his hand. "Walter, listen if you ever need anything. Anything at all. I appreciate it, Jim." I turned back to the register and started loading my items onto the belt. "I really do." I drove home with 4 bags of groceries in the back of the Civic and sat in the kitchen eating soup from the can because I had forgotten to buy a pot. And I thought about Margaret, who would have found this either deeply funny or deeply sad, and probably both. Derek came over that Thursday evening unannounced, which he had started doing twice a week since I moved to Kedzie. He knocked twice and walked in before I answered, carrying a paper bag from the Greek place on Lawrence Avenue, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the soup can on the counter, and his face did something complicated that he didn't manage to hide. "Dad," his voice was tight, "you're eating soup from a can." "I forgot to buy a pot." "I'll get you a pot." "Derek, I don't need a pot. I needed dinner." "Sit down." He sat. He pulled containers out of the bag roast chicken rice, something that smelled like lemon and garlic, and set them on the table with the focused energy of a man doing the only useful thing he could think of. We ate. The kitchen was warm, the food was good, and for a while neither of us said anything that needed saying. Then Derek set down his fork and looked at me directly, in the way he had looked at me since he was a boy, when he was working up to something. "Are you actually okay?" he asked. I looked at my son, 38 years old, sitting at the table of the house I had lived in before he was born, watching his father with eyes that were trying hard not to show how frightened they were. Underneath the table, my laptop sat in its bag, a progress report to Mills, half written on the screen, documenting 3 shell company transactions I had traced to a Delaware LLC called Meridian Infrastructure. "Better than you think," I said. He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded slowly and picked up his fork again. 2 weeks later, my phone rang at 4:17 on a Friday afternoon. The number was one I recognized. One I had not seen on my screen in 2 years. Marcus Doyle. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Doyle suggested coffee. "A small place near the Loop," he said, "nothing fancy, just catching up." I told Mills within the hour. She called back 20 minutes later. "Wear the pen camera," she said. "Don't order anything expensive, look tired." "I am tired." "Oh, good. Don't hide it." A pause. "Walter, he's going to be watching everything. How you hold your cup, whether you check your phone, how long it takes you to answer a question. Doyle reads people the way you read blueprints. He's been doing it longer than you've been doing yours." "I understand. One more thing." Her voice dropped slightly. "Don't be too eager. A man who's lost everything doesn't lean forward. He sits back." I wrote that down on a notepad and looked at it for a while after we hung up. A man who's lost everything doesn't lean forward. He sits back. The coffee shop was on West Adams, half a block from the Loop, the kind of place that had been there since before the neighborhood got expensive and hadn't changed its menu to acknowledge that it had. I arrived 7 minutes early and chose a table against the wall where I could see the door. Doyle walked in at 10 past the hour. Not rushed, not apologetic, simply certain that his schedule was the right one, and everyone else's would adjust accordingly. He was 64 now, silver-haired, the same composed posture I remembered from Margaret's birthday party a decade ago. He scanned the room once found me, and crossed to the table with his hand already extended. "Walter." His grip was firm and warm. "You look rested." "Retirement has that effect," I said. He settled into the chair across from me with the easy comfort of a man who was accustomed to being the most relaxed person in any room. He ordered black coffee. I ordered the same. "I heard things got difficult," he said. His voice carried exactly the right weight of concern, enough to seem genuine, not so much as to seem theatrical. "They did." I turned my cup on the saucer. "Cook County hit hard. A few other things didn't help. I'm sorry, Walter. Genuinely." He held my gaze. "You built something real. It's a shame when the market does what it does." "It happens," I said. And then, because Mills had told me a man who has lost everything doesn't perform dignity, he's simply too tired to pretend. Otherwise, I let my shoulders drop slightly and looked at the table. "You learn to adjust." Doyle watched me for 3 seconds. I counted them. "Actually," he said, "that's partly why I called." He turned his coffee cup in the same direction I had turned mine, a mirroring gesture, deliberate, the move of a man who had read the same negotiation books I had. "I have something you might find useful. Low pressure. Good money. The kind of work that doesn't require much, just your name and your relationships." "What kind of work?" "Introductions," he said. "I'm putting together a consortium for the new transit corridor project on the south side. City contract, pre-approved, budget, minimal competition. I need someone with your standing in the contractor community to make a few connections with the right people at the planning office." He picked up his cup. "Think of it as consulting." I looked at him. Let the silence sit for 4 full seconds before I answered. "Who specifically?" I asked. He gave me a name, a mid-level planning official on the city's infrastructure committee. I recognized it immediately as the name Mills had given me the previous week, a city employee who was cooperating with the FBI investigation, whose conversations were being recorded under a federal court order. Doyle had just handed me his test. "I know him," I said. "Slightly. Slightly is enough." Doyle set his cup down and smiled the same smile from Margaret's birthday party, from my wife's funeral, from every room he had ever walked into, believing he was the smartest man in it. "Think about it, Walter. No rush." "I will," I said. I called Mills from the Civic before I'd left the parking garage. "He offered me an introduction job," I said. "The transit corridor project." He gave me Thomas Grady's name. "Grady is ours," Mills said immediately. "Cooperative witness wired since March. Doyle just handed you the test we were expecting." A brief pause. "You need to pass it." "How?" "Call Grady. Set up a meeting. We'll brief him on what to say. Doyle will verify through his own channels that the meeting happened. That's all he needs to know. And then he trusts you." Her voice was steady and precise. "And then the real work begins." I sat in the parking garage for a moment after we hung up. The Civic's engine ticked as it cooled. Above me, the city moved in its ordinary Thursday afternoon way, 100,000 people going about business they expected to finish. I thought about what Margaret had said on the back porch the May evening I'd shown her the folder, her voice steady and exact, pointing me toward the only place the whole thing could start. She had been right about that too. I had the name. I had passed the test. And Marcus Doyle, sitting in his glass office on Michigan Avenue, believed he had just recruited a broken old man with nowhere left to go. He had no idea what was following from what. Before I tell you what happened at that dinner table, comment the word card right now, so I know you're still with me. What you're about to hear, I never saw coming. Just a heads up, parts of this story include fictional elements for narrative purposes. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. Mills called me on a Sunday evening in late September. "We think Doyle is going to move on you publicly," she said. "Within the next few weeks. He wants to see you react in front of people he can observe. What kind of mouvement? We don't know the specifics. But his pattern, we've seen it twice before with other targets, is to engineer a situation where you're visibly diminished in a social setting, somewhere with witnesses, somewhere you'd normally have standing. She paused. He needs to see that you're genuinely broken, Walter, not performing, genuinely. And if you react, he pulls back, and we lose 6 months of work. Her voice was flat and direct. I need you to be completely unreadable. I understand. Do you? She said it carefully, not unkindly. Because this won't be a stranger saying something in a parking lot. It could be someone close to you. It could be your son. I held the phone for a moment without speaking. Through the kitchen window, the backyard of the house on Kedzie was dark. Just the orange glow of the streetlight on the fence Eleanor had told me needed repainting. Tell me what to do, I said. Practice, she said. Literally practice. I'll send you audio. You stand in front of a mirror and you practice not moving. For 7 mornings, I stood in the bathroom of the house on North Kedzie at 6 a.m. and listened to Mills's recordings through one earbud while I watched my own face in the mirror above the sink. The recordings were things a person might say to a man they believed had failed completely. Harsh things. The kind of words that locate the specific places where a person is most vulnerable and press there deliberately to see what comes out. Day 1. My jaw tightened at the 3rd sentence. I started again. Day 3, I made it to the 7th before my eyes changed. I started again. Day 6, I stood through the entire 4-minute recording without a visible response. In the mirror, my face looked like a man waiting for a bus-present patient giving nothing away. Day 7, I turned off the recording, looked at my own reflection, and said quietly to the man looking back at me, "Okay, Maggie, I'm ready." Jean and Georgetti on West Ontario Street has been a Chicago institution since 1941, dark wood paneling white tablecloths, the kind of steakhouse where the waitstaff knows your name and your usual order and doesn't write either one down. Derek had suggested it 3 days earlier. Dinner with family, he said. Just the 4 of us, him, Carol, me. I walked in at 7 on a Friday evening in October and saw immediately that Doyle was there. Corner table partially screened by a support column, a glass of red wine in front of him, and a companion I didn't recognize beside him. He didn't look at me when I came in. He didn't need to. A man like Doyle doesn't look at the thing he's watching. He positions himself so the thing walks into his field of vision naturally. I noted the pen camera clipped to my jacket lapel legal under Illinois law, which requires only one party to a conversation to consent to recording, and that party was me, as Mills had confirmed in writing 3 weeks prior. I noted the table Doyle occupied. I noted the sightlines. Then I went to join my son. Dinner moved well for the first 40 minutes. Carol talked about a renovation project they were considering. Derek ordered the bone-in ribeye and ate with the focused appreciation of a man who had been eating chicken at his father's house for 6 months and was relieved to be somewhere with proper beef. I ordered the same and drank water and let the conversation carry itself. Then Derek set down his knife. Dad. He said it the way he said things when he had been building up to them a single word with a whole paragraph behind it. Yeah. I've been thinking. He looked at the table first, then at me. About the company accounts, the remaining assets. I think it might make sense for me to take over managing things, just until you're back on your feet. I'm on my feet, Derek. Dad. I'm managing fine. He looked at Carol, who looked at her water glass. Then he reached across the table and picked up my wallet, which I had set down when I came in, and he opened it and removed my credit card, the black American Express that had been in my wallet for 11 years, the one that used to have a limit higher than most people's annual salaries, and now sat in a wallet that also contained a library card and $14 in cash. He set the card on the table between us. He picked it up with both hands, and he broke it in half. The sound was small and clean in the ambient noise of the restaurant. Carol's breath caught audibly. Two people at the next table glanced over. Derek set the two pieces down on the white tablecloth and looked at me with an expression that was trying to be kind and was something else entirely underneath. "A bankrupt man," he said, "has no business holding a card this powerful. Not anymore." The table was very still. I looked at the two pieces of the card on the white cloth. In my chest, something tightened and then released like a cable under load, finding its limit and holding. In the corner of my vision, I was aware of Doyle's table, of a stillness there that meant he was watching. I thought of 7 mornings in front of a bathroom mirror. I thought of Margaret's voice. Everything else follows from that. I picked up my water glass, drank slowly, set it down. Then I looked at my son and said, with a voice as level as a surveyed grade line, "You're right. Keep it." I pushed the two pieces of the card across the table toward Derek. He stared at them. He had expected anger. He had expected argument. He did not know what to do with calm, and it showed in his face a flicker of something uncertain, something that didn't fit the script he had written. In the corner, Doyle's fingers moved toward his wine glass and then stopped. I picked up my fork and returned to my dinner. Some things break quietly. A credit card snaps in half and makes a small, clean sound, nothing dramatic. Nothing that would turn heads in a crowded restaurant if you weren't already watching. What happens after that is different. What happens after lives in parking lots and kitchen doorways and the dark hallway outside a closed front door, and it doesn't make any sound at all. I drove home alone from Jean and Giorgetti. The Civic's heater ran loud and the radio stayed off, and I took the long way back to Kedzie without deciding to. Just found myself going north on Clark, instead of cutting across the way you sometimes do when you need the extra minutes before you have to be anywhere in particular. I parked in front of the house and sat there for 20 minutes without going in. The card was broken. Derek believed his father was finished. Doyle, from his corner table with his glass of Barolo and his careful watching eyes, had seen exactly what he came to see. Everything was going according to plan. So why did I feel like I had left something important behind on that white tablecloth? I found out later from Carol 3 weeks afterward what happened in the parking lot of Jean and Giorgetti after I left. Derek sat in his car for 40 minutes. Didn't start the engine. Just sat. Carol knocked on the passenger window at the 20-minute mark, and he unlocked the door without looking at her. She got in. She told me he was gripping the steering wheel with both hands even though the car wasn't moving. Knuckles going pale, staring at the parking structure wall in front of him, like it had said something he was trying to understand. "Derek." She put her hand on his arm. "Come inside." Did you see his face?" His voice came out rough, scraped thin at the edges. "When I broke it, he looked at it, like he expected it." "Derek, what kind of son does that?" His jaw was working the way it did when he was fighting something back, in front of other people. What was I thinking? Carol. What was I actually thinking? Carol told me she didn't answer right away. She sat with him in the dark of the parking structure and let the question breathe. "You were thinking you were helping," she said finally. "I was being an idiot." "Yes." She didn't soften it. "But idiots can fix things. It depends on the idiot." He laughed at that, a short, broken sound, not much humor in it, but real. Then he put his forehead down on the steering wheel and stayed there for a while, and Carol kept her hand on his arm, and neither of them said anything else until he was ready to drive home. 11:47 that same night. I was in the kitchen on Kedzie reading through a new set of documents Mills had sent transaction records connecting Meridian infrastructure to 2 additional shell entities registered in Nevada when the motion sensor on my front porch light activated. I looked at the security camera feed on my laptop. Derek was standing on my front porch. He was in the same clothes from dinner jacket, no tie hands in his pockets. He was looking at the door. His breath made small clouds in the October air. He raised his right hand and held it up fist-closed 6 inches from the door. He didn't knock. He stood there for 8 minutes. I timed it on the corner of my screen, one eye on the transaction records, one eye on my son standing on my porch in the cold, with his hand raised and his jaw set, and whatever he had come to say locked somewhere he couldn't quite reach. Then he lowered his hand, turned around, walked back down the steps to his car. I sat at the kitchen table with my hand on the door handle for 30 seconds after his taillights disappeared at the end of the block. Then I let go. "Not yet, son," I said to the empty kitchen. Not yet. Lily started coming on Saturday mornings about a month after I moved to Kedzie. 8 years old, Derek and Carol's daughter, my only grandchild, a small person with Margaret's eyes and an opinion about everything which she had inherited from the same source. The arrangement was Derek's idea, I think, though he presented it as Lily's. She wanted to spend time with Grandpa, he said. She asked specifically. I suspected she had asked specifically because Derek had suggested it, and she was generous enough to let him believe it was her idea. She showed up the first Saturday at 9:15 with a backpack containing a library book, a box of colored pencils, and 3 very serious opinions about which ice cream place on North Milwaukee Avenue was the best and why. I listened to all 3 opinions with the gravity they deserved, and then we went to the one she had already decided on before she listed the others. On the 4th Saturday, I made the mistake of reading a Mills briefing document at the kitchen table while Lily was coloring, and I thought she was focused on her drawing of a horse with anatomically improbable legs. She was not focused on her drawing. "Grandpa." She set down her green pencil and looked at me with Margaret's eyes, direct and undeflectable. "That paper has a lot of zeros on it." I closed the folder immediately. "You're supposed to be drawing." I was drawing. Now I'm observing." She folded her hands on the table in a gesture so precisely like her grandmother that my chest ached with it. "Are you actually broke, Lily? Because broke people don't smile when they read papers." She tilted her head slightly. "You smiled? Just for a second, but you did." I looked at my granddaughter, 8 years old, colored pencil still in one hand, watching me with the calm, patient certainty of someone who had already decided she was right and was simply waiting for the evidence to confirm it. I set the folder aside, leaned forward, spoke quietly. "Don't tell your dad." Her eyes went wide, not with surprise exactly, but with the particular satisfaction of a hypothesis confirmed. Then she straightened in her chair and nodded once with a seriousness that made her look briefly about 40 years older. "Okay," she said, "but you owe me ice cream." "Deal." She picked up her pencil and went back to the horse. But every few minutes for the rest of that morning, I caught her glancing at me from under her lashes, watchful, pleased, keeping a secret, the way Margaret used to keep secrets, which was to say completely and with evident enjoyment. Mills showed me the surveillance photographs on a Tuesday morning in November. She spread them across the conference table in the Dirksen building without preamble, 8 photographs clear and well lit, the kind of quality that came from a camera that knew what it was doing and had been positioned by someone who knew where to point it. My son and Marcus Doyle. 3 separate locations. A coffee shop on South Michigan Avenue, a lunch counter in the Loop, A parking structure on West Randolph where two men could talk without being overheard, or so they believed. I looked at each photograph for a long time before I moved to the next. How long? I asked. First contact was approximately 8 months ago, Mills said. She kept her voice even and professional, which I appreciated. Shortly after you began the visible phase of the operation. Doyle approached him. Yes, we have the initial meeting on camera. Doyle came to Derek's office, presented himself as a consultant interested in partnering on city infrastructure work. Derek had no reason to know who he was. I looked at the photograph from the parking structure. Derek was leaning against the hood of his car, arms crossed, listening to something Doyle was saying. His expression was the expression of a man who believed he was being offered an opportunity. I had seen that expression on my son's face before. I had put it there a few times when I came to him with a project he was right for. Doyle had learned to imitate it. I hadn't seen that coming, and the failure sat in my chest like a cold stone. "And what did he give him?" I asked. Operational details, primarily. Staffing levels, equipment inventory, active contract timelines. Mills turned one of the photographs to face me directly. Nothing classified. Nothing that would constitute criminal disclosure on its own. But Doyle used the information to identify which city contracts Greer and Sons was positioned to bid on, and then ensured Derek was steered toward bids that were already prearranged. He was using Derek to identify targets. Yes, and to create a paper trail that looked like legitimate business development. She paused. Derek didn't know what he was participating in, Mr. Greer. We're confident of that. But he was providing information that had value to the operation, and Doyle was extracting it carefully over time in small enough pieces that none of it raised flags. I set the photographs down and pressed both hands flat on the table. Is he in trouble? I asked. That depends on what he does next, Mills said. If he cooperates with our investigation, comes in, voluntarily provides a full account of his interactions with Doyle, agrees to testify, then his status is witness, not subject. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already indicated they would not pursue charges against someone who was demonstrably manipulated without criminal intent. She looked at me directly. But I need him to tell me that himself, Mr. Greer. I can't extend that protection based on your word alone. He needs to come in. I looked at the photographs one more time. My son in a parking structure on West Randolph, listening to Marcus Doyle tell him things that weren't true, believing them, because he had no reason not to. Because Doyle was very good at this, and Derek was a contractor, not a federal investigator, and the two skill sets are not interchangeable. Give me time, I said. How much? I'll let you know. Carol knocked on my door at 10 o'clock that same evening. I had been expecting Derek, if anyone. The knock surprised me, 2 quick, firm raps, the knock of someone who had decided to do something and was moving before the decision could be reconsidered. She was standing on the porch with a laptop under one arm and a manila folder under the other, wearing a coat. She hadn't fully buttoned hair, still damp at the ends from a shower she'd clearly cut short. Behind her, the street was quiet. Her car parked crookedly at the curb in the way of someone who had pulled up fast. Is Derek with you? I asked. No. Her voice was tight and clipped and very controlled. He thinks I went to get milk. I need 20 minutes. I held the door open. She came in, set the laptop on the kitchen table, and opened it before she sat down. Been looking at the company accounts for. She turned the laptop to face me. Her finger moved down a column of highlighted entries. These vendor payments, she said. 11 transactions over 7 months. Each one under $10,000, that's below the federal reporting threshold that triggers automatic bank review called the Bank Secrecy Act structuring limit. These amounts are not accidental. Someone chose them deliberately to stay under that number. She looked up at me. The vendor they're paid to is called Meridian Infrastructure, LLC. I pulled the registration. The business address is a vacant lot in Cicero, Illinois. She stopped. Her hands were very still on the table, the stillness of someone who had been holding something in for a long time and was now carefully, deliberately setting it down. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just slightly. "Please, Walter, tell me I'm looking at a bookkeeping error." I looked at the spreadsheet. Meridian Infrastructure, LLC. The same entity I had been documenting for 6 months. The same shell company that connected to 3 others registered in Nevada and Delaware, all of them traceable, if you followed the thread far enough the way Mills had followed it back to Marcus Doyle. "You're not wrong," I said. Carol closed her eyes. She pressed her lips together and breathed out slowly through her nose, the breath of someone absorbing a thing they had hoped wouldn't be true. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough." "Does Derek—" She stopped, read my face. "He doesn't know." "No." "Walter." Her voice steadied, sharpened. "He is my husband. I cannot sit across from him at dinner and know this and say nothing. I am not capable of that. I know." I kept my voice quiet. "Carol, if Derek knows, Doyle knows within days. And if Doyle knows, everything we have built over the last 18 months falls apart and he walks away from all of it." I held her gaze. "I need 3 more weeks. Can you give me 3 weeks?" She looked at me for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere on the block, a dog barked twice and stopped. 3 weeks, she said. Not a day more. She closed the laptop, picked up her folder, and buttoned her coat on the way to the door. At the threshold, she paused with her hand on the frame and looked back. "For what it's worth?" she said, her voice quieter now, the control in it softer. "I don't think Derek had any idea what he was doing." "I know he didn't," I said. She nodded. Then she walked out into the November night, and I listened to her car pull away from the curb and watched the taillights disappear at the end of the block. And I thought about how many people were carrying pieces of this thing without knowing they were carrying the same thing. I went back to the kitchen table, opened my own laptop, and wrote the longest progress report I had sent Mills in 18 months. I knew Ray Cummings's handwriting the way I knew my own. 40 years of birthday cards and Christmas notes and napkin sketches at job sites. The particular way he formed his sevens with a horizontal bar across the Middle European style. A habit he'd picked up from a Belgian engineer on a bridge project in 1986 and never lost. You don't forget a man's handwriting after 40 years. You just sometimes wish you didn't recognize it. The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning in January, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon circular in the mailbox on Kedzie. Plain white standard size no return address. My name written on the front in blue ballpoint, those sevens immediately, unmistakably, Ray's. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no signature. Just a company name written in the center of the page in the same blue ballpoint, Meridian Infrastructure, LLC. I stood on the front porch in the January cold and looked at that name for a long time. Then I went inside and called Mills. "I know who sent this," I said. "Who? An old friend." I set the envelope on the kitchen table and looked at it the way you look at something that has just rearranged everything you thought you understood. "I need to go see him myself first." Ray Cummings lived in a bungalow on North Pulaski Road that he had owned since 1979, a solid, well-kept place with a covered porch and a driveway. He shoveled himself every winter, point of pride. I had been to that house for cookouts for football Sundays for the wake after Ray's father died in 1998. I had sat at his kitchen table more times than I could count. He answered the door on the second knock, and what I saw in his face when he recognized me was not surprise. It was relief. The particular relief of a man who has been waiting for something he dreaded and has finally stopped waiting. Walter. His voice was rough. He stepped back from the door. Come in. The kitchen was the same as always. The same round table, the same 4 chairs, the same photograph of Ray's late wife on the shelf above the stove. He put coffee on without asking. His hands were steady, but his shoulders carried something heavy, the kind of weight that had been there long enough to change a man's posture. We sat down. He poured. Neither of us touched our cups. I know it was you, I said. The envelope. He looked at the table. I should have done more. Tell me what happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he started talking, and once he started, he didn't stop the way a man talks, when he has been holding something back for so long that the relief of releasing it outweighs the shame of what it is. He had met Doyle through a mutual contact in 2018, a routine introduction, nothing unusual. Doyle had been pleasant, knowledgeable, the kind of man who made you feel like the smartest person in the room for knowing him. They had collaborated on a small project in 2019, and somewhere in that collaboration, Doyle had found what he was looking for, a financial irregularity in Ray's books from 2015, a billing discrepancy on a county project that Ray had corrected internally and never reported small enough to be an honest mistake, large enough to be a problem if someone decided to make it one. He didn't threaten me directly, Ray said. His coffee sat untouched, going cold. He never said the word blackmail. He just made it clear that he was aware of the situation, that he found it interesting. Ray's jaw tightened, and then he told me what he needed. Information about me. Not at first. Ray looked up, and his eyes were red at the rims, not from crying, but from the particular exhaustion of a man who had not been sleeping. At first it was general things, industry contacts, who was bidding on what. Nothing that went directly to you. He stopped. Then Cook County came up, and he started asking specific questions about your operation, your margins, your key subcontractors, who you trusted. The coffee smell in the kitchen was warm and ordinary, and entirely at odds with what was sitting between us at that table. I tried to give him as little as possible, Ray said. I want you to know that. I tried to. He stopped. Started again. It doesn't matter what I tried. What matters is what I did. Why didn't you call me Ray? The question landed and stayed there. Ray looked at his hands on the table. Big hands, so a contractor's hands. The kind that had driven stakes and poured footings and built things that were still standing 30 years later. Because I was ashamed, he said. His voice dropped to something barely above a murmur. 40 years, Walter. 40 years we've been friends, and I let that man use me against you. How do you call someone and say that? He shook his head slowly. How do you pick up the phone and say I couldn't protect you, and I was too cowardly to tell you? But here's a piece of paper with a company name on it, because it was the only thing I could think of that might help. My chest pulled tight. I looked at my friend, 68 years old, sitting in his kitchen on Pulaski Road, where I had sat 100 times before, carrying something that had been eating at him for 3 years. You call them? I said quietly. That's how. You call them and you say it. Ray looked up at me. His eyes were wet now, not spilling over but close. I'm sorry, Walter. I know you are. I should have, Ray. I kept my voice steady. I need you to do something for me now. Something that actually matters. He straightened slightly. What? And I need you to talk to an FBI agent named Karen Mills. I watched his face go through several things quickly. Tell her everything you told me. Every conversation with Doyle, every question he asked, every piece of information you gave him. I held his gaze. You were coerced. That's documented in what you've just told me, and Mills will see it the same way. But I need your account on record. Ray was quiet for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down Pulaski Road through the January gray. Okay, he said finally. The word came out steadier than I expected. Okay, Walter. I drove directly from Ray's house to the cemetery on Ridge Avenue where Margaret was buried. Stood at her headstone for a while in the cold, hands in my pockets, looking at her name in the granite. 2 people, I said quietly to the stone, to the January air, to whatever of her might still be listening. You and Ray, both of you trying to protect me without knowing the other one was doing the same thing. I paused. You would have found that funny. You always found the things that should have been sad a little bit funny. The wind moved through the bare trees above the headstones. I stood there until my hands went numb. Then I drove back to Kedzie and wrote Ray Cummings' name into my progress report for Mills. Mills spread the completed case file across the conference table on a Thursday morning in March. 119 pages. Tabbed, indexed, color-coded, the kind of document that represented years of careful work by people who understood that federal prosecutions live or die on the quality of their paper trail. She set it in front of me and let me look at the cover page for a moment before she spoke. Dear Marcus Doyle, she said. 4 co-conspirators, 11 city infrastructure contracts spanning 2017 to 2022. Estimated damages to the city of Chicago, $47,300,000. She paused. Sherman Antitrust Act violations. Wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343 for using electronic communications to advance the scheme. Conspiracy charges under Title 18, Section 371. She folded her hands. It's a strong case, Mr. Greer. The strongest we've built in this division in 6 years. But, I said. She looked at me directly. There's one gap. I already knew what she was going to say. I had known since the morning she showed me the surveillance photographs in November. I had been carrying it for 4 months, the way you carry something you know you will eventually have to set down carefully, with both hands waiting for the right moment. Derek Sono, I said. Derek, she confirmed. He was the primary conduit through which Doyle obtained operational intelligence about Greer and Sons over an 8-month period. His testimony about those interactions, what Doyle said, what he asked for, how the relationship developed, closes the last gap in our timeline and corroborates the financial evidence Carol identified. She kept her eyes on mine. Without his account, Doyle's defense team will argue that the Meridian payments were legitimate consulting fees, and that any information Doyle received came through normal industry channels. With Derek's account, that argument falls apart. What happens to Derek if he cooperates? The U.S. Attorney has already agreed in principle, pending Derek's formal cooperation, that he will not be named as a defendant. He was manipulated, not complicit. The record is clear on that. She paused. But I need him to come in voluntarily, Walter. I need his account in his own words on the record in a formal interview. I cannot extend prosecutorial protection based on second-hand characterization, however credible the source. I looked at the case file. 119 pages. Ray's account in there somewhere. Carol's spreadsheet. 47 documents from a folder Margaret had named on a night I thought she was simply organizing old files. When do you need him? I asked. As soon as possible. We're targeting an arrest date in late November. That gives us roughly 8 months to finalize everything. But Derek's interview needs to happen first. It affects how we sequence the rest of the preparation. I nodded, pushed my chair back, stood up. Give me a few days, I said. I drove back to Kedzie and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without doing anything in particular. The table was the same one that had been here when Margaret and I rented this house in 1983. We had left it when we moved to Wilmette because it didn't fit the aesthetic of the new place. And when I bought the house back in 2015, it was still here, left by the previous tenants, slightly warped along one edge from 40 years of Chicago humidity, but fundamentally solid. I had eaten every meal at it since January. I knew every scratch in its surface. I opened the drawer in the sideboard against the wall and took out the notebook I had been keeping since 2020, the one that contained every date, every name, every transaction I had documented in the years before Mills came into the picture. Near the back, a page I had written in September 2020 when I was still doing this alone and wasn't sure it would ever amount to anything. If this works, Derek doesn't need to know how it worked. He just needs to know it did. I looked at that sentence for a long time. Then I turned to a blank page and wrote, "If this works, Derek needs to know everything." I had been wrong the first time. I could see that now clearly, in the way you sometimes can't see a thing until enough time has passed for you to look at it from a different angle. Keeping Derek in the dark had been necessary. It had also cost something in trust, in the relationship between a father and a son. In the 8 minutes Derek had stood on my porch in October with his hand raised and his mouth closed because he didn't know how to say what he'd come to say. That cost was real, and the only way to settle it was with the truth. I called him that evening. He picked up on the second ring, his voice carrying the careful, slightly too casual tone he'd adopted since the restaurant, the tone of a man trying to sound normal and not quite managing it. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "I need you to come over," I said. "Tomorrow morning, just you, not Carol." A pause. "Is something wrong?" "A lot of things were wrong for a long time," I said. "I'm going to explain all of them." Another pause, longer. "Dad." "Derek." I kept my voice even. "I need you to trust me one more time. Can you do that?" The line was quiet for a moment. I could hear him breathing steady, measured, the breath of a man deciding something. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I can do that." After we hung up, I sat for a while longer at the kitchen table. Lily had left a drawing on the sideboard from Saturday, a picture of a man and a small girl eating ice cream rendered in green and orange-colored pencil, signed in her careful 8-year-old hand at the bottom. Underneath her signature in smaller letters, she had written Grandpa's secret friend. I looked at that drawing for a long time. Then I folded my hands on the table, looked at the kitchen ceiling, and said to the empty room, to Margaret, to Earl, to the 40 years of everything that had brought me to this kitchen table, on this particular Thursday night, almost. There's no manual for telling your son that you've been lying to him for a year. Not lying exactly, Mills would have corrected me on that, and she would have been right. Withholding, performing, constructing a version of reality that he could see and move through and react to, while the actual reality ran parallel, invisible, 6 inches underneath the surface of everything he thought he understood. But standing in my kitchen on a March morning, watching Derek's car pull up to the curb on Kedzie, I didn't have the energy for the distinction. I had kept things from my son for 14 months. Now I was going to stop. He came in, the way he always came in, 2 knocks. Then the door not waiting for an answer, because I had told him 20 years ago he didn't need to wait at his father's door. He was in jeans and a work jacket, coffee from the place on Lawrence in his hand. And he looked at me with that carefully neutral expression he had been maintaining since October, the expression of a man determined to seem fine. Morning, Dad. He set his coffee on the table. Carol says hi. Sit down, Derek. He sat. He read my face, whatever was in it, and whatever he read made him set down his cup very deliberately and fold his hands on the table the way he did when he was preparing himself for something. How bad is it? He asked. It's not bad, I said. Not anymore, but it was. And you need to know all of it. I started from the beginning. Not from the coffee shop on West Adams or the pen camera or Mills. I started from November 2019, from Richard Kowalski's phone call from the number on the page that had changed everything. I told him about the 6 months of pulling threads alone about the name at the center of the web. I told him about the dinner we had hosted about Margaret on the back porch, saying, "Invite him, Walter. You need to see how he behaves when he thinks he's won." I told him about the folder she had been building in secret, about the 47 documents, about the line at the bottom of the last page. Derek listened without interrupting. His coffee went cold. He didn't touch it. When I got to Earl Dixon, something moved across his face. He had known Earl from job sites, had worked beside him as a teenager one summer on the Kedzie Avenue Bridge project. When I told him Earl had died in July 2022 without seeing how it ended, Derek looked at the table and pressed his lips together hard. "Keep going," he said quietly. I kept going. Mills, the cooperation agreement, the decision to make the bankruptcy visible, selling the house, selling the car, the 7 mornings in front of the bathroom mirror. When I got to the restaurant, to Jean and Giorgetti, to the October evening, to the card, Derek stood up from the table. He didn't walk anywhere. He just stood with his back to me, both hands on the counter above the sink, looking at the wall in front of him. His shoulders were rigid, the muscles along his spine taut under his jacket. "You knew I was going to do that?" he said. His voice was rough, scraped down to something raw underneath. "Yes." "You knew and you let me." "Yes." In front of all those people. He turned around then, and his eyes were bright, and his jaw was working, and he looked exactly the way he had looked at 17 when he came home from his first real failure and didn't know yet that failure wasn't permanent. "I humiliated you, Dad. I sat there and I broke your card and I said, 'Derek.' I said you had no business. 'Derek.' I kept my voice level. 'I need you to hear what I'm about to say.'" He stopped, breathed, nodded once. "You did what you believed was right," I said. "You were wrong about what was happening, but you were not wrong in wanting to help. There's a difference between those two things, and it matters." "It doesn't change what I know," I said. "It doesn't change what you did, but it changes what it means." I held his gaze. Doyle was in that restaurant. He needed to see a genuine reaction from you. If I had told you, your reaction would have been a performance. It would have been wrong, and he would have seen it, and 2 years of work would have come apart in one evening. I paused. I let you be yourself to protect you from something worse. That's not a perfect decision, but it was the one I had. Derek stood at the counter for a long moment. Then something in his shoulders released, not completely, not all at once, but enough. He came back to the table and sat down. "Tell me about Doyle and me," he said. "Tell me what I did," I told him. All of it, the surveillance photographs, the 3 meetings, the operational information he had provided, without knowing what it was being used for. I watched his face as he understood piece by piece how carefully he had been maneuvered. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. His hands were flat on the table, very still, the way mine had been in Mills's conference room in March, when I first saw the photographs. "He used me against you," Derek said. "Yes." After everything, he stopped. He sat in our kitchen. He ate Mom's food, and then he— Yes. Derek's jaw tightened until the muscle above it jumped. His eyes went wet, not spilling over, held back by the same stubbornness that had kept him standing on my porch in October instead of knocking. "What do you need from me?" he asked. "I need you to talk to Mills," I said. "Tell her everything about your interactions with Doyle. Every meeting, every conversation, every document you provided. On the record in a formal interview." I leaned forward slightly. "You were coerced and manipulated, Derek. The U.S. Attorney's Office has already agreed not to pursue charges against you if you cooperate voluntarily. But you need to go in yourself and give your account." Derek looked at me for a long moment. "And then it's over?" he asked. "Then it's over." He picked up his cold coffee, looked at it, set it back down. "I want to come with you," he said. "When they arrest him, I want to be there." "That's not how it works." "I know." He exhaled. "I know that." He looked up. "Dad, I need to ask you something." "Ask." "The night at the restaurant." His voice was careful, precise, the voice of a man choosing words that needed to land exactly right. "When I broke the card, what were you thinking?" I looked at my son across the kitchen table, where we had eaten 100 meals and had 100 conversations, and where his mother had once sat across from me and given me the only direction I had ever needed. I was thinking," I said, "that you had no idea how much power was still in that room." Derek looked at me. Then for the first time since he walked through the door that morning, he smiled, small, tired, real. "Okay," he said. "Tell me where to go." 8 months is a long time to wait for something you have already decided. Derek's interview with Mills happened in April, 3 hours in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Dirksen building, Walter outside in the hallway on a wooden bench reading the same 2 pages of a Sports Illustrated he had picked up from the waiting area table without looking at the cover. When Derek came out, his face was pale, and his handshake with Mills was firm, and he didn't say much on the elevator down, but somewhere between the lobby and the parking garage, he put his hand briefly on my shoulder, and that was enough. The months that followed were the strangest of the whole operation, stranger in some ways than the visible ones, than the Walmart trips and the Civic and the 7 mornings in front of the bathroom mirror. Because outwardly, nothing had changed. I still lived on Kedzie, still drove the Civic, still went to St. Benedict's on Sundays and ate dinner with Derek and Carol on Thursday evenings and picked up Lily on Saturday mornings for ice cream on North Milwaukee Avenue. But underneath all of it, the case was moving. I could feel it the way you feel a structure settling, not dramatically, not with noise, just the slow, sure compression of something very large coming to rest exactly where it was designed to go. Mills called me on a Sunday evening in November. I was in the kitchen, the remains of a dinner I had made for myself still on the table, a cup of coffee gone cold beside them. "Tomorrow morning?" she said. 6 a.m. "It's done, Walter." I set my coffee cup down very carefully. "All of them. Doyle and 4 co-conspirators. Simultaneous arrests, 4 locations across the city. Federal warrants signed this afternoon." I looked at the kitchen around me, the narrow room, the old table, the photographs Margaret had never seen because I had moved here after she died. The Tran Lily had drawn last Saturday still on the sideboard. A new one this week. 2 figures at an ice cream counter, the taller one with gray hair. "Walter." Mills's voice came back through the phone. "You all right?" "I'm here." "Get some rest tonight." "Mills." I stopped her before she could hang up. "Why did you take this case 3 years ago when Earl first brought you my name? Why did you say yes?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because Doyle had been running this operation for 6 years, and nobody could get close enough to him to make it stick. Another pause. And because when Earl described you, he said this is a man who built half of Chicago and lost everything because he trusted the wrong person. And I thought, she stopped, started again. I thought that was a story that deserved a different ending. My throat tightened. Thank you for that. Don't thank me yet. Her voice was dry, professional, but something warmer moved underneath it. Thank me tomorrow. After we hung up, I poured the cold coffee down the drain and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the November dark. The backyard of the house on Kedzie was the same rectangle of winter-dead grass. It had always been the same rusted fence Eleanor Marsh had told me needed repainting, which I had repainted in May, and which already needed it again. I opened the sideboard drawer and took out Margaret's notebook. Her handwriting, her sevens without the European crossbar, unlike Ray's, her careful accountant's columns of dates and names and amounts. I turned to the last page she had written. I had read it enough times that I had it by memory, but I read it again anyway, the way you return to certain things, not because you need the information, but because the act of returning is itself the point. Don't let anyone take that. Not Doyle. Not anyone. And below it, smaller, P.S. Tell Derek I'm proud of him. Say it out loud, Walter. I closed the notebook, picked up my phone, called Derek. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying the alert quality of a man who had been half expecting a call. Dad, is everything okay? It's tomorrow, I said. 6 a.m. A breath on the line. Then, okay. Derek. I stopped, looked at the notebook on the table in front of me. Your mother was proud of you. She told me to say it out loud. The line was quiet for a long moment, not empty, just full of something that didn't have words yet. Dad. His voice came back thickened, unsteady at the edges. I know, I said. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a long day. After we hung up, I sat at the table for a while longer. The house was very quiet. November wind moved against the windows with a sound like something trying to get in and finding everything closed. I looked at Lily's drawing on the sideboard. The two figures at the ice cream counter. The taller one with gray hair. I thought about Margaret standing in this kitchen in 1983 looking at cracked linoleum and a window that didn't close, and saying it was perfect. I thought about Earl Dixon on the phone from his house in 2021, his voice rough and unhurried. What they cannot take is the 40 years of knowing how to build something from nothing. I thought about Mills asking me why I was doing this, and the drawing on the wall I had pointed to without saying another word, and Mills not asking anything more. I turned off the kitchen light. Stood in the dark for a moment. Tomorrow, Maggie, I said quietly. Then I went to bed. For the first time in 4 years, I fell asleep before midnight. At 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in November, while I was standing in the kitchen on Kedzie making coffee in the $15 Goodwill machine I had bought 18 months ago and never replaced, Marcus Doyle was being handcuffed in the lobby of his Michigan Avenue office. I didn't know that specific detail until Mills told me later. What I knew at 6 o'clock was the coffee and the particular quality of the November dark outside the kitchen window, and the sound of the machine working through its cycle the same way it did every morning, indifferent to the fact that anything was different about this one. My phone rang at 6:14. It's done, Mills said. Doyle and all 4 co-conspirators. Simultaneous arrests, 4 locations. Everything went clean. I stood at the kitchen counter with my coffee in my hand and looked at the window. The sky was beginning to go gray at the eastern edge, the specific gray of a Chicago November morning that can't decide whether it wants to be dawn or just a lighter version of night. Thank you, Karen, I said. It was the first time I had used her first name. She didn't correct it. Don't thank me, she said. You did the work. We just A pause. We just gave it somewhere to go. After we hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. The coffee went warm in my hand, then cooler. I didn't drink it. I just stood there while the sky made up its mind about the day, and I thought about Margaret in the study on a Tuesday night, 8 months before she died. The light on the laptop opened, the door closed. Building something she would never see finished for a man she trusted to finish it. I thought about Earl Dixon on the phone from his kitchen on Pulaski, his voice like gravel and certainty telling me that the thing Doyle had taken was never the thing that mattered, and that a man who knows how to build from nothing still knows that no matter what anyone takes away. I drank my coffee. Then I got dressed and went to work. The Chicago Tribune ran the story on Wednesday morning. Below the fold on the front page, 5 arrested in federal bid rigging probe, decade-long scheme, targeted city infrastructure contracts. My name appeared in the 4th paragraph, identified as a cooperating witness, whose documentation had been central to the federal case. Derek called at 7:15 before I had finished reading the article. "Dad." His voice was unsteady in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "It's in the paper." I know." "Your name is in it." "I know that too." "Dad." A breath. "It's over." "Yes." A longer silence, not empty, the way silences between people who have known each other for decades are never really empty. Then Derek said quietly, "I'm coming over." He arrived 20 minutes later with Carol and Lily, who was in her school uniform and carrying her backpack, and had clearly been told they were making a quick stop on the way to drop-off. She came through the door ahead of her parents, looked at me with those direct brown eyes and said without any preamble, "Is it done, Grandpa?" "It's done, sweetheart." She nodded one firm, satisfied nod, the nod of someone whose hypothesis had been confirmed on schedule, and then she put her arms around my waist and pressed her face against my chest, and held on with the complete, uncomplicated commitment that only an 8-year-old can bring to a hug. I held on back. Over the top of her head, I looked at Derek, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his eyes bright, and his jaw doing the thing it did when he was holding something in. "Come in," I said. "I'll make coffee." We sat at the kitchen table, all 4 of us. Lily between Derek and Carol, with her backpack on the chair beside her. We drank coffee, the adults, and Lily had a glass of orange juice and complained about her math homework, with the focused energy of someone determined to keep things normal, which I appreciated more than I could have explained. After Carol took Lily to school, Derek stayed. He sat across from me at the table where I had sat alone for 18 months, and he looked at the kitchen the way you look at a place when you're seeing it clearly for the first time, not what it appeared to be, but what it actually was. "This was the first house," he said. It wasn't a question. 1983, I said. "Your mother said it was perfect." Derek looked at the table surface, the old wood, the warped edge, the scratches that went back 40 years. He ran his hand along the grain, the same way I had run my hand along it 100 times since January 2022. "She was right," he said. "In December, I met with my attorney and the trust officer from First Midwest Bank to finalize the estate documents. The living trust placed the house on Kedzie and all primary assets under independent administration First Midwest Bank, named as corporate trustee with full fiduciary responsibility and no family member holding administrative authority. It was not a punishment. It was what Mills had called in one of our first conversations, a structure built on facts rather than assumptions. Derek received a formal role in the company's restructured operations, contingent on performance, not inheritance, not sentiment, but work. He accepted without argument. He had, I think, stopped needing the inheritance to mean what he had once needed it to mean. For Lily, I prepared a separate envelope, The trust officer handed it to her at the meeting. She had come with Derek and Carol, still in her school uniform backpack, on slightly suspicious of the formal office setting. She opened the envelope with the careful, deliberate movements of a child who understood something important was inside. The ring was small gold, simple, a plain band that had cost $14 at a jewelry counter in 1961 and had been sold to a pawn shop on North Clark Street in 1987 for $4,300 and had taken me 11 years to track down after I found the receipt in a box of Margaret's papers in 2012. Lily looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at me. "Is this Grandma's?" she whispered. "Her first one," I said. "She sold it a long time ago to help start something. Now it's yours to keep." Lily closed her fingers around the ring. Her eyes went bright and wet, and she pressed her lips together in a way that was so completely Margaret that my chest ached with the recognition of it. "I'm going to finish something really big, Grandpa," she said. Her voice was steady. "I know you will," I said. June 2024. A Tuesday evening, warm, the kind of Chicago summer night that makes you forgive the city for everything it does the rest of the year. I parked the Civic on West Ontario Street and walked into Jean and Georgetti. The host recognized me, a slight pause, a look, then the professional recovery. "Good evening, sir. Just yourself tonight?" "Just me." He led me to a table near the window. Not the same table as October 2022, I hadn't asked for it specifically, and this one was fine. Chicago moved outside the glass unhurried. The waiter came over, young, efficient, new since October. But the woman who brought the bread basket was the same one who had been there the night of the broken card. She stopped when she saw me, looked at me carefully. "Sir," she said, "weren't you here a while back with your son?" "I was. I remember thinking." She stopped herself. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't." "It's all right," I said. "What were you thinking?" She met my eyes. "I was thinking that whatever was happening at that table, you were the only person at it who knew exactly what it meant." I looked at her for a moment. Then I smiled, not the careful, managed expression I had practiced in a bathroom mirror for 7 mornings, but the real one, the one Margaret used to say arrived about 3 seconds after the thing that caused it, like I was always slightly behind on joy. "You were right," I said. "I ordered dinner." When the check came, I reached into my wallet and took out the black American Express new card, same account reissued in January 2024, when Mills confirmed the operation was fully closed. I set it on the check presenter. The waiter ran it without comment, brought it back. I signed the slip, Walter J. Greer. I left a 20% tip and walked out into the June evening. The Civic was where I had left it, reliable as always, its rear bumper still held on with the same optimism it had in 2022. I drove home to Kedzie, parked in front of the house, sat for a moment with the engine off, looking up at the lit kitchen window, the same warm yellow rectangle it had been the night I moved in. The night I had stood in the empty kitchen and said to the air, "It's still perfect, Maggie." 41 years since she had stood in this kitchen and called it perfect the first time. She had been right then. She was right now. I got out of the car, went inside, made coffee, sat down at the old table, and for the first time in a very long time, I had nowhere else I needed to be. People ask me sometimes what I learned from all of this. I tell them the same thing every time. I learned that the most dangerous thing a family can do is confuse love with ownership. Derek didn't set out to hurt me. He set out to protect me, and somewhere along the way, he stopped asking what I needed and started deciding for me instead. That's not love. That's fear wearing love's clothing. I learned that God doesn't always close the door on the people who hurt you. Sometimes he simply gives you enough time and enough clarity to build a better lock. And I learned this, which I wish someone had told me 40 years ago: the people who truly love you will stand beside you and ask what you need. The people who want to control you will stand in front of you and tell you what you have. If you are a parent reading this, don't do what I did. Don't carry things alone until they nearly break you. Talk to your children. Tell them the truth before silence becomes a wall neither of you knows how to climb. If you are a child reading this, ask first. Always ask first. The question costs nothing. The assumption costs everything. This is a grandpa story about family, about betrayal, about a quiet kind of family revenge that asks for no applause, only justice. These grandpa stories exist because someone needs to hear them. These stories of family revenge and second chances are, I believe, some of the most human stories we have. If this one found you at the right moment, leave a comment below. I read everyone. Share it with someone who might need it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, there's a button right below this video that costs you nothing and means more than you know. Thank you for staying until the end. You didn't have to, and you did anyway. That matters. One final note. The stories on this channel contain fictional elements constructed for storytelling and educational purposes. If that's not the content you're looking for, no hard feelings, find what speaks to you. But if you're staying, the next story is already waiting.